Harlan Decker set his pen down before Cole Briggs reached the desk. That was the first thing Cole noticed. Not the mahogany surface, not the framed certificates along the wall, not the careful arrangement of files that communicated order the way a locked door communicates keep out. Just the pen, set down with deliberate timing, the way a man sets something down when he wants you to understand that he has decided to give you his full attention and that this decision cost him something. Cole was 18 years old. He was wearing his grandfather's jacket, which was too wide at the shoulders and smelled of the cedar chest it had been kept in. He carried a folder of documents the county lawyer had assembled and driven out on roads that were more frost-heaved than road. 3 weeks after the funeral, he set the folder on Decker's desk without being asked. Decker opened it. He looked at each page the way a man looks at things he has already formed a judgment about. Then he said the number, $1,100, due and payable no later than the 1st of September. Cole took out the black notebook he had bought at Deacon's Feed for 15 cents 2 days after the burial. He wrote the number down in a hand his teachers had called too precise for a boy his age. Writing it made it something he could carry rather than something carrying him. He asked how much the harvest would need to bring per bushel to clear it. Decker told him, and paused before answering. The pause of a man surprised to be asked in those exact terms by someone sitting across from him in a dead man's jacket. Cole wrote that figure down too. Then he asked about the third page, the footnote at the bottom, a short-term operating line, $380, renewed each spring for seed and fuel, paid in cash every August without exception for 11 consecutive years. Decker said it was due July 15th, not September. July 15th. Cole wrote that down without changing his expression. He closed the notebook. He thanked Decker for his time. He put his grandfather's hat on his head and walked out of First Consolidated Bank of Cordell into a March wind that had nothing between it and the plains but wire fence and frozen ground all the way to Colorado. He did not look back at the building. He had two numbers. He had a notebook. He had until September 1st for the larger debt and until July 15th for the smaller one, which meant he needed cash he did not have from somewhere other than wheat before the wheat was ready. He turned this problem over on the drive out to Meeker line the way you turn a mechanical problem over, looking for the constraint that determines everything else. 4 miles of dirt road, 2 shallow creek crossings, both running thin in the cold. One cattle gate with a latch rusted at an angle nobody had gotten around to fixing. The farmhouse came up on the left, gray and square and still in the late morning light, sitting in the middle of ground that the winter had leached of every color. He sat in the truck cab for a moment with the engine idling before he got out. The place did not look like something worth fighting for. The north barn had a section of roof on the east side that had started to go. The fence line along the county road carried 3 posts leaning inward at angles that would not survive a wet spring. The equipment shed door hung on one hinge, held by the weight of itself. And somewhere inside that shed was a 1939 Farmall F-20 that his grandfather had disassembled with the careful logic of a man who intended to finish the job. He laid each piece on a feed sack in sequence, and then had not finished the job because dying had come first. Cole got out of the truck. Wade was at the entrance to the equipment shed. 71 years old, 24 years on this place. A man whose face had settled into the specific expression of someone who has watched a piece of ground long enough to know exactly what it requires and exactly what it costs. He had been watching the truck come up the road for a while before it arrived. Cole could tell by the way he stood. Wade stated his daily rate. Same rate for 4 years. No reason to change it. He said this without preamble. The way you state a fact that precedes the conversation rather than being part of it. Then he said that 3 men before Cole had tried to make something of this ground. 2 of them left inside 18 months. The third stayed 30 years and died in March. Cole asked which kind Wade figured he would be. Wade looked at the equipment shed. He looked at the truck. He said he had not decided. That was the only welcome Cole received and the only one he needed. The farmall's carburetor had been removed and laid out on the feed sack in component order, each piece placed left to right the way a man works through a procedure he knows well. The magneto points on one side had corroded through. The air cleaner had been serviced wrong at some point by someone who had either been distracted or had simply run out of the precision that careful work demands. There was a service manual wedged in the corner shelf. Its spine cracked so severely that it opened flat on its own to the carburetor section. The pages in that section were darkened at the edges from handling. Cole read it the way you read something you cannot afford to misunderstand. Wade observed the first afternoon without comment. On the second day, Cole over-torqued a manifold bolt, and Wade said one word: more. He handed over the correct wrench and resumed his silence for the rest of that week, passing tools when Cole reached out blindly without looking up. That was the extent of the instruction, and Cole did not ask for more because more was not being offered, and because the manual said what the manual said. He worked through the farmall the way the season ahead would require working through everything, one component at a time, each piece assessed before moving to the next. By the 20th of April, the engine caught and held. There was still a hesitation at low throttle that he could not trace to its source, something in the fuel mixture that would need attention before spring cultivation. But the machine ran, and when he drove it the length of the east field and turned it back toward the shed, it did what it was built to do. Wade was at the fence post when Cole climbed down from the seat. He said it was better than he had expected. Coming from Wade, this was considerable. Cole noted it in his notebook. April 20th, farmall running, throttle hesitation unresolved. He noted everything: the dates and temperatures, the direction the wind shifted and when, which mornings left frost on the north barn roof, and how long it held before the sun took it. The turkey red his grandfather had put in the previous October had come through the winter and was showing at the surface now, visible as a faint green suggestion if you crouched at the right angle, in the right light. He noted that too. He filled pages with observations that most men in Carver County would have seen no point in keeping, and he kept them because his grandfather had kept the same kind of record in a black notebook that Cole found in the kitchen desk drawer the first week, and because a man who keeps records has something to return to when the season turns against him. He had been on the place 9 days when Knox Gallagher came. Gallagher was 58 years old and carried the particular physical confidence of a man accustomed to having things resolve in his favor without requiring him to raise his voice. His canvas jacket was too clean for a working farmer. His truck, a 1950 Ford in dark green, had no scratches on it. He came through the gate without knocking, which Cole noticed, and he walked across the yard with the easy stride of someone moving through space he has already mentally organized, which Cole also noticed. He stood in the yard and looked at the farmhouse, at the north barn and the compromised roof section, at the equipment shed door and its single hinge. He looked at all of it the way an assessor looks at inventory before writing a number. He said he was sorry about Harlan. He said Harlan had been a fair neighbor. He said these things, and he meant parts of them. Then he placed a bank draft on the hood of Cole's truck. $4,200, made out to Cole Briggs, in the clean handwriting of someone who had prepared it at a desk before driving over. He said the price was fair, given the condition of the place and the season ahead. He said Cole was 18 years old and alone and carrying debt into what every signal from the county weather service was suggesting would be a hard summer. He said 3 families on this road had sold in the past 2 seasons, and none of them had regretted it. He said Cole did not need to hold himself to the same stubbornness as his grandfather. The word landed differently than Gallagher intended. Cole looked at the bank draft. He picked it up, folded it once without reading the figure again, and set it back on the truck hood. He said the land was not for sale. Gallagher did not change his expression. He looked at the equipment shed door hanging on its one hinge. He looked at the fence posts along the county road. He nodded once, the nod of a man adjusting a calculation rather than abandoning it. He said the offer would not hold past the first dry month. He got in the dark green truck and drove back the way he had come, And Cole stood in the yard until the vehicle was a shape in the distance, and then a line of dust, and then nothing. And then he went back to the equipment shed because the farmall still needed work. April ended, and May came in without ceremony. The northwest wind that had made the early weeks difficult shifted in the first days of June to the southwest and brought with it a quality of air that Cole did not have a name for yet, but that he recognized by the way it felt against his face in the afternoon. Thinner, drier, a different kind of dry than the cold dryness of winter. He wrote it in his notebook. June's second wind southwest. Sky color changed at noon. He wrote these things without yet knowing what they meant, only that they meant something. By the 6th of June, the wind carried grit, fine particles that settled on every horizontal surface, on the windowsill and the water in the stock tank, and on the back of a hand held still long enough to receive them. Cole walked to the north field that evening and crouched beside the wheat rows at intervals, working his boot heel into the soil to test the depth of the crust forming at the surface. The turkey red still looked right. The heads were filling, the color holding, the stems standing without the lean that comes when a plant starts reserving what it has. But the crust at the field edges told a different story about what was coming. The Gallagher wheat to the west told the same story more bluntly. By the 12th of June, the color of the Gallagher stand had shifted from green towards something in between green and gray. A color without a proper name that every farmer in this part of Kansas understood on sight. It meant a crop was negotiating with conditions it was beginning to lose. You could see it from the road without stopping. Cole saw it and wrote down the date. He saw Wade notice it one morning from the gate, standing with his hat at his side looking west, and then putting the hat back on and walking toward the barn without saying anything, which was how Wade communicated things he considered too obvious to state. The county paper reported dropping well levels in the eastern townships. A man from the state extension office was quoted. He said it was too early to be concerned. Cole wrote the man's name in his notebook and underlined it. Too early to be concerned. The farms south of Meeker Line were running their pumps. Cole could hear the mechanical rhythm of the Gallagher pump on the still evenings, carrying across the fence line in the absence of wind. The Reinhardt place to the south was running a pump as well. The sound of working equipment filled the evenings the way birdsong fills spring mornings, persistent and layered and full of urgency. Cole listened to it and kept his own valves closed. He had opened 2 irrigation valves in May as a precaution, and he closed them both in the second week of June and left them closed. He made no announcement of this. He did not explain it to Wade, who observed it and said nothing. In the evenings after dark, Cole walked the north field without a lantern, moving along the fence perimeter and then through the rows themselves, his hands brushing the stalks at either side, his attention on the ground underfoot rather than on anything visible. He was looking for something that did not have a name yet. Wade had mentioned once at the workbench in April that Harlan used to walk the north field at night. Specifically at night, not morning, not dusk, but in the dark when there was no apparent reason to be out there. Wade had said this almost to himself, the way a man mentions something that has puzzled him for years without resolution. And then he had changed the subject to the magneto. Cole had not pressed him. He had written it in his notebook. Northfield Nights. Why? The question had been on the page since April without an answer. The second week of July brought Gallagher back to Meeker Line, and this time he did not come alone. 2 vehicles turned up the drive at mid-morning on a Tuesday. Gallagher's dark green Ford, and behind it, a sedan that was not from Carver County, something out of Wichita with no mud on the wheel wells. The man who stepped out of the sedan was 45 years old, wore a suit that had not been bought within 200 miles of Cordell, and carried a leather satchel, which he opened on the hood of his car, with the practiced efficiency of a man who does this kind of thing regularly and considers it beneath commentary. Gallagher stood back. He let the other man speak. The other man spoke about the operating line. $380, due July 15th. He spoke with the care of someone who has reviewed the specific language in advance and knows exactly where the language allows him to stand. He said the bank had reviewed the line against current county conditions. He said it would not be renewed this cycle. He said the full amount was due on the date as written. He said none of this was personal. Nothing about it being personal was exactly the point. Personal could be pushed against. This had no surface to push against. Cole looked at Gallagher while the man from Wichita was still talking. Gallagher was looking at the field. When the other man finished, Cole said he understood. He said he would have the amount by the 15th. He said it without hesitation, not because he was certain of how, but because certainty about how was not the question being asked at that moment. The question being asked was whether Cole Briggs would show these two men something they would use later. He would not. The sedan left first. Gallagher walked back to his own truck more slowly, and at the door he stopped and looked at Cole with an expression that contained elements of several things and was not entirely any of them. He said he had watched 3 young men try to hold ground their fathers had lost. He said not one of them had made it past October. Cole said he was not trying to hold his father's ground. Gallagher waited for the rest of it. Cole said he was trying to hold his grandfather's. Gallagher got in his truck. He drove back to his 400 acres and his electric pump and his contacts in Wichita. And Cole stood in the yard until the sound of the engine was gone and the road was quiet, and then went back to the equipment shed because the farmall's throttle hesitation had not fixed itself, and he had identified this morning what he believed was the source. He could not sleep that night. He lay in his grandfather's bed in his grandfather's house and looked at the ceiling and listened to the windmill turning outside, unhurried, pushed by a wind too light to count as wind, turning from something closer to habit than necessity. He thought about the north field. He thought about the question that had been in his notebook since April. He thought about a man who walked a field at night for reasons that had not been recorded anywhere Cole had found. At 3 in the morning, he got up. He put his boots on. He went to the equipment shed, not to the field, because there was a task he had been postponing in the shed for 2 weeks. The back corner, where a shelving unit had been built against the exterior wall at some point before Cole was born and had not been moved since. He had been meaning to clear it, to assess what was stored there, and had done other things instead because the corner was dark and the items stored there were not obviously useful. He moved the shelf unit. It was fixed on 3 sides, and the floor runners had swelled into the boards over years of temperature change. He worked it out from the corner in increments, careful not to split the wood, until there was enough clearance to see behind the back panel. The back panel was not nailed. It was a piece of 1/4-inch board set into the frame by fit alone. When the shelf unit moved far enough forward, the panel tilted loose on one side. Cole caught it before it fell. Behind it was a gap. 4 inches of space between the false panel and the exterior wall. Too narrow to be accidental and too deliberate to be oversight. Cole reached in with both hands. His fingers found cloth, something wrapped and tied, fitting his palms the way objects fit when they have been made to last rather than to impress. He worked it forward and out carefully and stood in the shed holding it. The oilcloth was stiff and darkened at its edges, tied with kitchen twine that had dried over the years into something with the consistency of wire. He worked the knot loose in the lantern light, standing in the late-night silence with nothing moving outside. The windmill still for the first time all evening. Inside was a notebook, green cover, 4 inches by 6. The initials H.B. stamped into the lower right corner, pressed deep enough that he could feel the letters with his thumb before he looked at them. He did not open it in the shed. He carried it to the kitchen table. He made a plate of whatever he had in the icebox. He sat across from the notebook in the dark for a while before he lit the lamp, and when the lamp was lit, he pulled the notebook toward him and opened the cover. The first pages were survey notes, pencil, tight and exacting, the lettering of a man who needed to be understood by someone who was not present, elevations in feet and tenths, distances in yards, a north arrow drawn freehand, close enough to true, Along the top margin, in block letters pressed into the page, Northfield, verified grade, October 1928. Cole sat with this. He turned the page. A cross-section drawing, the ground in layers, viewed from the side. Below topsoil, below the root zone, at a depth marked 18 inches. A horizontal line ran from one margin to the other, with branches dropping from it at intervals like the veins of a leaf turned sideways. Handwritten dimensions along the main channel, notes along the branch's flat stone, tamped clay, oak plug. At the left margin, circled twice in pencil source. He turned to the calculation pages. Flow rates estimated against soil permeability. Lateral distances calibrated to pressure loss over grade. Time projections for how long a slow feed could sustain moisture in packed clay soil with an established root system drawing from it daily. Cole worked the numbers in the margin of his own notebook. He worked them twice because the first time he did not fully believe the results. They held. Both times, the same result. At the bottom of the last calculation page, written in a darker pencil, pressed harder into the paper, a single sentence that had not been planned as a sentence, but arrived as one gravity does the work if you give it a reason. He read it 4 times. He turned to the entries near the back. Not engineering, just words. October 1929. Seeded the North 40 with turkey red, water system complete and sealed. The spring is holding steady. Whoever reads this will need to know the hatch is 80 feet due north from the 4th corner post, measured from the inside post face. Do not take the iron for debris. It is not debris. It is what this place was built around. Cole set the notebook on the table. The lamp burned without movement, the flame perfectly still in the windless kitchen. His grandfather had built a subsurface water collection system in 1928 and sealed it and covered the hatch and said nothing to anyone, including the man who had worked this ground for 24 years. He had planted turkey red in 1929 with the system beneath those rows already in place. He had farmed through the drought years of the 30s and the dry stretches of the 40s with a water source that no neighbor, no county official, no assessor, no banker had known existed. And when he understood that he was dying, he had wrapped the engineering record in oilcloth and put it in the one place where it would only be found by someone willing to work the corner of a shed that appeared to hold nothing of value. Cole sat at the table for a long time. Outside, the windmill turned once, a single slow rotation, then stopped. He looked at the 2 numbers in his black notebook. He looked at the calculation pages in the green one. He looked at the date at the top of the survey notes. October 1928, 23 years before this kitchen table. 23 years before Cole was sitting here with a lamp and 2 notebooks and a debt and 67 acres and a question that had finally been answered. He closed both notebooks. He put on his jacket. He went to wake Wade. Wade's boots were already on the floor when Cole knocked. The door opened before Cole had finished the second knock. Wade stood in the frame fully dressed, a tin cup of something cold in one hand, his jacket already over his other arm. He looked at Cole in the lantern light, and then at the green notebook Cole was holding, and then back at Cole. He said nothing. He hung the tin cup on the hook inside his door and put his jacket on and stepped out. They walked the north field in the dark together. No lantern this time. Wade knew this ground the way you know ground you have maintained for 24 years, by the particular resistance of the soil underfoot, the slight give near the second fence post, the almost imperceptible rise in the path 30 yards before the northern edge. Cole navigated by what the notebook had described. He counted from the northwest corner, 4 posts east, then due north, pacing 80 feet with Wade, walking alongside him without needing to be told what they were doing. Cole crouched at the count. The surface was undisturbed, packed and dry and featureless, the same as every other square foot of the north field. He started clearing it with his hands, working in sections, moving the accumulated chaff and compressed surface material outward from the center. Wade crouched beside him and did the same without being asked. Cole's right hand found iron. Flat iron, cast smooth on the upper face. Circular, a recessed lip along one edge with a gap just wide enough for the short pry bar Cole had taken from the shed and handed to Wade at the start of the walk without explanation. He looked at Wade. Wade already had the bar positioned. They leaned into it together. The ground had grown into the seam over 23 years. The rust had worked its way into every tolerance. Nothing moved at first, then it gave. The hatch lifted with a sound that Cole spent years afterward trying to describe accurately and never fully managed. Not a groan, not a crack. Something between the two, long and low. The sound of a long-held breath finally released. Cold air came up from below, then the smell, mineral and clean. Stone that had never been warm. Water that had not encountered open air in decades. Cole leaned over the edge and looked down. In the darkness below, a surface caught the faint pre-dawn gray from above and gave it back. Water, still and dark, 4 feet below the lip of the hatch. Perfectly still. The way water is still when nothing has moved it in a very long time. He had a pebble in his jacket pocket. He had put it there at the shed without consciously deciding to. He dropped it in. The sound it made was deep, not the brief tap of shallow water, but something with real depth behind it, a resonance that confirmed what the notebook had described before he had believed it fully. Wade sat on the rim of the hatch and let his legs hang over the edge. He looked at the water below for a long time. Then he said, without looking up, that he had not known, not that he suspected, not that he had guessed, that he had not known. Cole sat beside him. For a while, they both looked at the water without speaking, and the sky above them began its slow transition from black to the dark blue that precedes gray. Then Cole opened the green notebook to the engineering pages and began working out what he actually had. He estimated the spring at 300 gallons per day. Below the 400 his grandfather had recorded in 1929, using the conservative number because a man managing a deficit uses the worst defensible figure. He estimated the cistern volume from the cross-section sketch and the depth implied by the sound of the pebble. He worked out the days to harvest maturity based on the current growth stage of the turkey red. He calculated the daily draw required to keep the root zone at adequate moisture through the critical final weeks. He ran the numbers twice, knees on the ground, notebook balanced on one palm in the pre-dawn light. They fit, not with comfort, not with reserve to spare, but they fit. He looked up at Wade, who had been watching him work without asking what the conclusion was. Cole told him the cistern could carry the crop to an August 6th cut if they opened the laterals today and kept the 2 southern branches at half flow until the final 10 days. He told him about the $380 due July 15th and what he had already worked out in the dark of his grandfather's bedroom before coming to knock. Sell the 3 surplus fuel drums to the co-op and the watch from the desk drawer to the man in Cordell who had offered $15 for it in April. That covered it. Wade listened to all of this. When Cole finished, Wade asked one question. He asked whether Cole had read all the way to the final entry in the green notebook. Cole said he had. Wade stood from the rim and brushed his palms on his work pants. He looked out across the dark shape of the north field. When he spoke again, it was not to Cole directly, but in the general direction of the field, the way a man speaks when what he is saying is for a larger audience than the one present. He said they would need to start on the lateral channels before the sun got high. They started before sunrise. The channels were not gone. That was the first thing Cole confirmed when he uncovered the initial branch line, 20 feet east of the hatch, along the grade the notebook had specified. 2 decades of silt and compressed earth had buried them, but had not filled them. The stone lining his grandfather had set at 18 inches was still positioned, still angled correctly to the grade. Cole worked the trench with the spade and Wade moved behind him, checking alignment and clearing loose material. And when Cole released the first test flow from the cistern, the water found the channels without direction. It did not pool. It did not search for a new route. It went where the grade told it to go, moving with the patient certainty of something that has been pointed at a destination for a long time and has simply been waiting for the obstruction to be cleared. Cole sat on the edge of the open trench and watched the water move. This was how he understood Harlan Briggs for the first time, not as family, but as a kind of engineer, a man who had studied a problem with complete attention, solved it once, and built the solution to outlast him, not for recognition, not expecting to be here to see it work, just because the problem required a solution and he was the one present to provide it. Cole wrote in his notebook that evening, not reflection, just the record. Lateral system follows original grade. Stone lining intact, primary branches. Western junction partially silted, cleared in 40 minutes. First flow test successful. No loss to surface. Through the second half of July, the work divided itself into two channels of its own. There was the field work, the daily monitoring of lateral flow and branch gate adjustment, and the soil assessment at irregular intervals, pressing boot heel into the rows to feel the depth of available moisture rather than using his hands, changing the method across the field to build a more complete picture. And there was the money work, which did not pause because the field demanded attention and could not be allowed to. On July 9th, Cole drove to the co-op with the fuel drums in the truck bed. The man at the counter looked at the drums and named a price. It was fair for the conditions. Cole accepted without negotiating because negotiating would have cost time, and he did not have time to spend on amounts that already fit his calculation. On July 12th, he went to the man in Cordell, who had offered $15 for his grandfather's watch in April. The man offered $12 now, which Cole had anticipated, and Cole said 15 was the price, the same as April. The man considered the watch and agreed. Cole had prepared for the lower offer and had not needed the preparation. And the specific quality of what that felt like was not relief but steadiness. The feeling of a man whose accounting has absorbed the variance. He drove to First Consolidated on the morning of July 15th and laid the combined amount on Harlan Decker's desk, the co-op check and the difference in cash. Decker counted it. He stamped the operating line receipt. Neither of them said anything that either would remember because the stamp said everything that needed saying. Cole drove back out to the field. Knox Gallagher was at the fence line when Cole turned onto Meeker Line, one boot on the lower rail, arms along the top wire, looking at the north field. He had been there long enough that his truck was off. Cole pulled to the road shoulder and got out and stood at the fence 20 yards from where Gallagher stood and looked at what Gallagher was looking at. The north field had not turned. Everything surrounding it had. The Gallagher wheat to the west was the color of old straw, past the stage of negotiating with the drought and into the stage of accepting the outcome. The farms south of Meeker Line were gray-brown, some already disked under by men who had made their calculations and found them honest. The Briggs North Field stood in the middle of this landscape in a color that had no business being there, not the bright green of spring, a darker, more considered green, the color of something that had found a way to continue when the logic of the season said it should not have been able to. Gallagher turned and looked at Cole. Cole looked back. Gallagher said he had been farming Carver County for 31 years and had seen 3 hard summers in that time, and he had never seen a standhold without running equipment. Cole said nothing. Gallagher said it again, differently. He said he could not account for what he was looking at. Cole said good drainage. Gallagher looked at the field for a long time after that. Then he turned to Cole again with an expression that was not the expression of assessment or strategy, but of something older, something that precedes commerce and lives behind it. The look of a man who has just encountered something that does not fit the framework he has been using and is being required to build a new one. He said the offer was gone. He was not withdrawing it as a tactic. He was stating a fact. Cole waited. Gallagher said he had 400 acres and a pump pulling from a water table that had dropped 14 feet since May and a wheat crop that would yield a fraction of what he had planned for. He said this as information, not complaint. He said he wanted to be straight because being straight was what the moment required. Cole said he heard him. Gallagher got in his truck. He drove back down the county road, and Cole stood at the fence until he was gone, and then went to check the eastern lateral gate, which needed adjusting in the afternoon heat when the soil temperature drove the root draw higher. He adjusted it. He checked soil conditions at 3 points along the eastern fence using the toe of his boot. Reading the resistance and color of the displaced soil, he wrote down what he found. He kept working. The final week of July brought the worst heat of the summer. Cole rose before 4:30 each morning without needing the alarm he had set and walked the field in the dark, not searching for anything as he had searched in June, but maintaining the kind of vigilance that has become habitual, a physical relationship with the ground that does not require justification. On the 28th, he sat at the kitchen table with both notebooks open and did the final accounting. The cistern had performed better than his conservative estimate. He had measured the level every third day by dropping a knotted rope through the open hatch and reading the wet mark against the dry. The spring had not dropped below 260 gallons per day through the worst of the heat. Current estimated volume, 9,400 gallons. Days remaining to minimum harvest maturity, 9. Daily requirement to run all 4 lateral branches through August 6th, roughly 300 gallons. He ran it 3 times. The same result each time. One decision remained. The western branch, feeding the 12 acres in the southwest corner. He had held it at half flow since July 3rd to protect the margin. Those 12 acres were the thinnest part of the stand, the rows sparser, the heads slightly lighter than the rest. At half flow, they would yield something, 30% short at a minimum, possibly more. If he opened the western branch to full flow today, he committed everything in the cistern to an August 6th cut with nothing held back, no reserve for a gate that stuck in the night or a channel section that silted unexpectedly, no margin for mechanical failure, no second options. Cole sat with this for a while. He picked up the green notebook and turned to the page with the single sentence. He read it not because it made the decision for him, but because it named what he was actually doing, which was different from not knowing what to do. He put on his jacket. He walked out to the western branch gate in the dark. The handle had not moved in 26 days, and it was stiff with dried soil worked into the threads. He set his weight into it. It held, then gave, slowly and then all at once. And below the surface of the ground, he heard the water begin its movement through the stone-lined channel. A low, traveling sound, steady and unhurried. The sound of something that has been waiting and has now been given a direction. He stood at the gate for a moment in the dark field. Everything was committed. Everything Harlan Briggs had built across 2 years of careful work and everything Cole Briggs had done across 5 months of careful attention were pointed now at a single day in August. He had done the arithmetic enough times to trust it. He went back to the house. He slept 4 hours. He woke before the alarm. He made coffee on the wood stove, the same stove his grandfather had used every morning for 30 years, and drank it standing at the window, looking at the dark outline of the north field against the eastern sky beginning to lighten. Wade knocked once at 4 past 4 and came through the door without waiting, already in his jacket, his boots already on. He looked at Cole. Cole said they would start from the north end at first light. Wade said he had checked the binder blade the night before. Cole had not asked him to. Cole had driven to the Hendricks place 3 miles north the previous Tuesday, hat in hand, and explained what he had and what he needed. Roy Hendricks had walked him to the equipment shed and helped him hitch the borrowed McCormick binder to the Ford without asking whether Cole was certain about his timing or his numbers. He helped hitch it and then shook Cole's hand and went back inside. That was the kind of man Roy Hendricks was, and Cole had not forgotten it and would not. They drove the binder out of the shed at 4:40 in the morning with the headlights cutting across the wheat rows. Cole walked 3 rows into the field before they started cutting. He pressed the heads between his palms, feeling for kernel resistance. Firm from center to tip, the way fully mature grain feels when the moisture balance is right, when what went in through root and stem has been converted to what should be there at the end. He walked back to the binder. He said they could start. They started at the north end and worked south, the machine moving in straight passes, the reel turning and the blades cutting and the bundles falling behind them clean and regular. Cole drove the first passes and Wade walked the windrow edge, lifting bundles, checking their weight in the specific way an experienced man checks weight without a scale. The bundles were heavy, not the yield of an exceptional year, not record numbers, but honest and complete. The yield of a crop that had received what it needed at the rate it could use it. Ellis Cobb arrived at 7:15 in a government Ford. He parked at the gate and stood outside his vehicle with his clipboard at his side and looked at the field. On the fourth pass of the binder, Cole could see him from the tractor seat and did not stop. Cobb did not enter the field. He watched the machine work and wrote on his clipboard at length, more than a few words, his pen moving steadily. Knox Gallagher arrived at 7:30. He came alone. No sedan from Wichita. Just the dark green Ford, pulling onto the county road shoulder where Cobb had not left room for him and managing the spacing without complaint. He got out and walked to the fence and put one boot on the lower rail with his arms along the top wire. The same posture he had held in late July when he had told Cole the offer was gone. He did not call out. He did not gesture. He stood at the fence and watched the McCormick binder move through 67 acres of turkey red wheat that by every measure of the summer should not have been standing. On the western pass, Cole came within 30 yards of Gallagher. He could see the man clearly from the tractor seat. Gallagher was not calculating. He was not assessing. He was watching the way a man watches something he has held a settled belief about and is now required, by the evidence in front of him, to revise. Cole kept his eyes on the next row. The cutting went through the morning and into the early afternoon. 58 of the 67 acres fell in the morning. The remaining 9, the corner acres where the western branch ran shallowest, took 2 more hours because Cole walked each section before allowing the binder in, pressing his boot heel into the soil to confirm density. All 9 acres were harvestable, not matching the yield per acre of the northern rows, but real and complete and going to the elevator. Gallagher stood at that fence for 4 hours and 40 minutes. Cole did not keep track of this, but later, adding up what he remembered, that was the accounting. When Cole shut the binder down and stepped off the tractor, he walked the field perimeter 1 complete circuit before stopping. Not to check anything, because it was the right way to finish this particular thing, and because it was what his grandfather would have done, and because some actions have a correctness to them that has nothing to do with efficiency and everything to do with what a man owes the ground that has kept him. When Cole completed the circuit and came back around the south end toward the gate, Gallagher was gone. Just the fence, just the county road, just the settled dust where his tires had been. Cole went to find Wade. Wade was in the equipment shed, cleaning the binder blade with a rag and a can of solvent he had located in the supply corner without being told where to look. The afternoon light came through the compromised section of the east roof in a single bar across the shed floor. Cole stood in the doorway for a moment. He said they needed to load before 4 to make the elevator. Wade set the rag down. He said the truck had been running since 3. They loaded in 2 trips, Cole on the bed, stacking, and Wade on the ground lifting. The bundles communicated their weight through Cole's arms and shoulders in a way that had nothing unpleasant about it. It was the weight of something that had come through. The Cordell County elevator sat at the south end of town on the rail spur, a structure that had been taking in Carver County grain since 1911. The man running the intake scale that afternoon was named Porter, broad through the chest, a man who had presided over enough harvests to have shed the commentary that attaches itself to ordinary ones. He weighed both loads. He ran the moisture test. He wrote the numbers on the ticket in a hand so practiced it was difficult to distinguish from print. He read the yield figure aloud without inflection. Cole wrote it in his notebook. Porter completed the bank draft, signed it with the co-op counter signature, and slid it across the counter. Cole picked it up and looked at the number. He had estimated this yield a dozen times across the past 3 weeks, working from the lateral flow data and his grandfather's original calculations and his own field assessments. And the number on the draft was within $40 of what he had calculated as the realistic ceiling. Not luck. The product of a water system built in 1928 by a man who had done the arithmetic before Cole existed and had gotten it right. Cole folded the draft and put it in his shirt pocket. He thanked Porter, who acknowledged this with the nod of a man who regards the transaction itself as sufficient thanks. Cole and Wade drove back through Cordell. The town had not changed since March. The same facades, the same proportions of light against the buildings in the late afternoon, the same angle of shadows across the sidewalk. Nothing about Cordell had changed. What had changed was internal to the man driving through it, and that was where it belonged. He slept that night without setting an alarm for the first time since March. He woke at 4:30 regardless. He lay in the dark listening to the farmhouse accommodate the temperature change of early August morning. The small adjustments a structure makes when it has been in one place long enough to have learned the patterns of the ground it sits on. Then he got up. He made coffee. He stood at the kitchen window with the cup and looked at the north field in the dark, which was cut now, the stubble pale and low in the starlight, the field looking smaller than it had with the wheat standing. The way a field always looks smaller after harvest, when the vertical dimension has been taken away and only the horizontal remains. He drove to First Consolidated when it opened. Harlan Decker was at his desk, the same files, arranged with the same careful system, the same pen in hand. He looked up when Cole came in. Recognition crossed his face before his expression finished composing itself. Cole sat across from him without being invited, which was different from the last time he had sat in this chair, when being invited had felt like a form of management. He put the bank draft on the desk. He said the amount covered the full balance on the primary note, plus the operating line already paid in July, plus any accrued interest Decker's office calculated as applicable. Decker picked up the draft. He read the figure. He set it down and opened the middle drawer and removed 2 files, the primary note and the operating account. He reviewed both. He said the draft more than covered both accounts. Cole said he was aware of that. Decker took the stamp from the drawer. He pressed it onto the primary note, centered over the signature line, hard and flat, and the red mark came up clean and complete across his grandfather's name. He pressed it a second time onto the operating account. The sound the stamp made was not remarkable, but it had a finality that Cole felt physically, a release of something he had been holding at a specific tension since March and had not realized until it released. Exactly how much it had been costing him. Decker looked up across the desk. He said something. Cole remembered afterward that words had been spoken, but not what they were. Because he had already stood and picked up his hat and was walking toward the door. He went out of First Consolidated Bank of Cordell into the August morning. He stood on the sidewalk. The street was conducting its ordinary business. A truck at the corner. The smell from the bakery 2 doors down that had been coming out of that building at this hour since before Cole was born. He stood in all of it for a moment, not thinking about anything in particular, and then he put on his hat and walked to the truck. He did not go directly back to the farm. He drove north on the county road past the Hendricks place, past the Reinhardt farm that had gone to Gallagher in June, past the creek crossing that had run dry before May. He drove without a stated destination until he turned onto Meeker Line and knew that he had probably known the destination since he left the bank. He parked at the north end of the 2-track and walked the rest. The stubble field was quiet in the mid-morning with no wind moving through it. The kind of stillness that settles on the Kansas plains at certain hours, a stillness with weight to it. the air holding itself in place. He walked the perimeter of the north field first, all four sides, unhurried. He looked at the stubble and the soil, and the cleared ground where the lateral channel seams were just visible as slightly darker lines running below the surface if you knew they were there and knew where to look. He knew both things now. He stopped at the northwest corner, counted 4 fence posts east, turned north, paced 80 feet. The hatch was still open. He had not closed it after the final draw, intending to check the water level after harvest and reseal it then. There had been too much else requiring attention in the days since. He crouched at the rim. The water was lower than it had been. The draw through all 4 laterals over the final 9 days had taken what the arithmetic had predicted, but the spring was still feeding. He could hear it if he held still long enough. The movement of water through stone, a sound too quiet to notice unless you were listening for it specifically, continuous and unchanged since 1928. He sat at the rim with his legs over the edge, the same way Wade had sat the morning they opened the hatch together. He thought about the man who had built this. Not Harlan Briggs, as Cole had known him in boyhood summers. An old man with deliberate movements and a way of looking at the sky before speaking, as though consulting something above the available words. He thought about Harlan Briggs in 1928, at whatever age that had been, crouching in this exact position with wet concrete and tools and a plan made for a person who did not yet exist, who might never come to this ground at all, who might come and sell it without opening the equipment shed, who might open the shed and never think to move the shelf unit. He had built it anyway, because the ground required it, and because he was the kind of man who did what the ground required when he was the one present to do it. Cole took out his folding knife. He began clearing the section of the concrete cistern collar he had never fully cleaned, the northern rim where the concrete had been pressed into the subsoil by decades of contact until the two materials were almost indistinguishable. He worked the blade slowly along the seam, letting the edge find the join rather than forcing it. The compacted material came away in fragments. He worked 6 inches of the rim, then 12. The concrete beneath was rough poured, leveled by eye and patience, the surface of a man working without a form. At 14 inches from the east edge, the blade met something that was not the texture of aggregate, not the roughness of surface concrete. Lines, deliberate lines, pressed into the wet concrete with something narrow and pointed, sized to be readable by a face at ground level in available light. Cole shifted his body to let the morning light fall directly onto the surface. 2 letters, a period, 4 numerals, H, B, 1928. He did not move for a long time. He stayed in that crouch with one hand resting on the concrete rim and looked at the 6 characters and let them be what they were. A signature, the mark a man makes when he wants the work to carry his name even if no one is ever there to read it. Harlan Briggs had knelt at this rim in 1928 when the concrete was still accepting impression, and he had pressed these marks into the material with whatever he had at hand. And then he had covered the collar with packed earth and 23 years of weather, and he had not mentioned it to anyone. Cole sat down fully beside the hatch, his back against the rim, legs extended on the stubble. He looked up at the August sky, the specific pale blue of a summer that has spent what it had and is now moving towards something cooler. The neighboring ground in every direction he could see was brown. His own stubble was among it now, delivered and paid out. From a distance, it looked the same as everything else around it. He reached into his jacket and took out the green notebook. He set it on the concrete rim beside the carved initials. Front cover up, the H, B, stamp facing the same direction as the carved H, B, below. He left it there for a time, not as ceremony, as acknowledgement, the appropriate language for what he was trying to communicate, because his grandfather had lived in that language and Cole was learning it. Then he picked the notebook up and put it back in his jacket. He had work to do. September 1st came and went without event. No vehicle from the bank, no letter requiring a response, no truck from the Gallagher property. The debt was gone, and with it the specific organizing pressure that had structured every morning since March. In its absence, Cole found himself reorienting toward a different category of questions, the kind without deadlines that a man managing a piece of ground must eventually face if he intends to manage it past the first year. The north barn roof needed attention before the first winter weather arrived. The fence line along the county road required 3 new posts. The farmall's throttle hesitation had been traced at last to a worn accelerator pump diaphragm, which Cole had ordered from a parts supplier in Wichita and was waiting for. He worked through these items in the weeks after harvest, in the order their urgency required, the same method he had applied to the carburetor in April, the same method that seemed to be the only reliable one for any problem that mattered. Weighed, stayed. He had not announced that he would stay. He had not said he would not. After September, the question stopped being open and became simply the state of things, the way long-standing facts stop being facts you note and become part of the ground you stand on. Ellis Cobb drove out to Meeker Line in October. The third time he had come to the farm that year, and the first time he came inside. He sat at the kitchen table with his clipboard face down, which was different from every previous interaction, and accepted the coffee Cole poured without being asked. He said he wanted to understand the drainage system. He said it directly, without framing it as anything other than what it was. Cole told him everything. The cistern and the lateral channels and the survey notes dated 1928, and the construction completed in 1929, the spring output through the summer, and the yield it had supported, the engineering calculations his grandfather had written, and how they had held against the actual performance of the system under the worst conditions the summer had produced. Cobb listened without writing anything on his clipboard. When Cole finished, Cobb sat for a moment. Then he said that in 31 years in county agricultural extension, he had not seen a subsurface lateral system fed by a natural spring produce sustained yield through a drought summer without mechanical support. Cole said his grandfather had built it to last. Cobb said he could see that. He paused, then asked if he could look at the notebook. Cole considered this. He looked at the green cover on the table between them. He thought about what his grandfather had done in keeping this specific and private, and about whether the distinction between privacy and secrecy was one of intent or outcome or both. He slid the notebook across. Cobb opened it carefully. The way you handle something that belongs to someone else. He spent time on the engineering calculations. He looked at the cross-section drawing for several minutes. He read the final entries. He closed the notebook and returned it. He said he would like to bring someone from the State Agricultural College in the spring to examine the system, if Cole was willing, not to claim anything, not for any purpose beyond documentation. The design approach represented something his office had not seen recorded in this region, and it was worth understanding. Cole said he would think about it. Cobb stood and picked up his clipboard. At the door, he turned back once. He said the young man running this place had impressed him. Cole said his grandfather had done the work. Cobb said that was true. He said it took a particular kind of attention to recognize work that had already been done and understand how to complete it. He drove back down Meeker Line, and Cole watched the settling dust, and then went back to the fence post he had been setting before Cobb arrived. Cole put the winter wheat in during the second week of October. Turkey red again, same variety, same north field, same rows that sat over stone-lined channels his grandfather had set at 18 inches of depth in 1928. He had cleaned and resealed the hatch and set the lateral gates to their winter position, which the notebook described with a note about reduced flow during cold months when the root draw decreased. He followed the notation. He followed all the notations that applied, and where his own experience through the summer suggested a variation or an addition, he recorded it in his black notebook with the date and his reasoning and the outcome, so that whoever came after him would have the same kind of starting point he had been given. He did not make a decision to do this. It became a habit the way useful habits become habits, through repetition and through the understood fact that the work of a piece of ground outlasts any one person's tenure on it. On a morning in late November, the first morning cold enough to put a hard frost on the north barn roof, Cole came back from the field to find an envelope on the kitchen table. Wade had left it there from the day before, a letter postmarked from a law office in Wichita. Inside was a single page in Knox Gallagher's own handwriting, which was not what Cole had expected. He had expected, if anything came from Gallagher at all, to receive it through the language of attorneys. It was not a legal document. Gallagher wrote that he had farmed Carver County for 31 years and that in those years he had conducted himself well in some respects and poorly in others, and that he was accounting for the latter, and this letter was part of that accounting. He wrote that the situation with the operating line in July had been arranged and not incidental, and that he had agreed to the arrangement and had paid for it to be made, and that Cole had a right to know this. He did not use the word apology. He said he was being straight now because the alternative was to carry it indefinitely, and he was at an age where carrying things that did not belong to him had begun to cost more than he was willing to pay. He said the properties he had acquired on Meeker Line over the past 2 seasons would be worked by tenant farmers who knew the land, and that consolidation was not what he intended for them. He said Cole had run a sound operation this summer. He said this was not a small thing in the year they had all just been through. The letter ended there. Cole read it twice. He set it on the table. He thought about what an accounting from a man who had worked against you is worth, and whether receiving it changes the weight of what was done, and whether the weight needed to change or whether it was simply a fact of the summer, the same way the drought had been a fact, something that had shaped the season without requiring his ongoing attention. He put the letter in the back of his black notebook. He wrote no response. He went out to check the gate on the western lateral branch, which had been showing a slight weep at the stone junction that needed monitoring through the first freeze-thaw cycles. The stubble field held the morning quiet around him as he walked the path from the farmhouse. Each cut stalk caught the low November light at its tip, the frost making the whole surface appear to have been dusted with something that was not quite silver and not quite white. The hatch was sealed and covered again, invisible to anyone who did not know to count fence posts and pace north from the fourth. The spring below it was still running, still filling the cistern at its winter rate, still doing what it had been doing continuously since the year it was first given a direction. Cole crouched at the western junction and pressed 2 fingers into the cold soil to check the seep. The ground had gone cold through the top several inches, but under the cold there was still the trace of moisture, held in the clay the way clay holds things, slowly and for a long time, reluctant to give up what it has been trusted with. He stood. He was 18 years old. He had 67 acres, a tractor that ran, a water system that worked, a north field with winter wheat in the ground, and 2 notebooks, one green and one black. That together constituted the full record of what this place was and what it was becoming under his management. He had Wade, who would be in the equipment shed when Cole got back, working on something that had not been requested and would not be commented on, because that was the arrangement they had arrived at without negotiating it. He had a letter in the back of the black notebook from a man who had worked against him and eventually written to acknowledge it, which was more honesty than most situations of that kind produced, and less than a full accounting required, but something nonetheless. He walked back along the field edge, the frost compressing under his boots with each step. At the corner of the field he stopped and looked back at the ground. 67 acres of stubble and frost, the faint seam lines of the lateral channels barely visible in the low-angle morning light as slightly darker traces running just below the surface. You would have to know they were there to see them. He had not built any of it. He had found it and understood it and kept it running for 1 season, which was what had been required of him and which had turned out to be enough. Maybe the work of inheritance was not ownership, but continuation. Not the claiming of what someone left, but the becoming of the kind of person who understands why it was worth leaving and acts accordingly. He did not say this to anyone. He put both hands in his jacket pockets, his left hand finding the corner of the green notebook where it rested against his ribs, and walked the rest of the way to the farmhouse. The windmill at the south end of the equipment yard was turning in a light morning wind from the northwest, slow and even, just enough movement to confirm that it was still doing what it had been built to do. Wade was in the equipment shed. Cole could hear the wrench turning in a slow, deliberate rhythm before he reached the door. The rhythm of a man who knows exactly what the work requires and is in no hurry to finish it before it is done. Cole hung his jacket on the peg inside the door. He took the green notebook from the pocket and set it on the kitchen table. He opened his black notebook to the next blank page. He wrote the date, the temperature, the condition of the western lateral junction and what the soil had communicated under his fingers at that location, what the frost looked like on the north field at this hour, and what it would look like in an hour when the sun cleared the barn roof and began its work on it. Then he put down the pen and looked out the kitchen window at the field. The frost was already beginning its slow conversion from silver to gold as the sun climbed. The stubble shifting color, the way things shift when light changes, not the object, but the quality of attention being paid to it. He left the pen on the open page and went to help Wade with whatever the shed required.
When I was young, I chased the horizon. Certain peace was waiting there. I thought the storms were wrong turns taken, and every burden was unfair. So I spent years fighting the mountains, cursing every winding road, never seeing that the struggle was the thing that made me grow. The eagle learns within the wind, the oak grows strong beneath the snow, and every soul that's worth becoming must walk where harder paths may go. The road was never meant to be easy, the storm was never meant to pass. The waves were not there to stop me, they were there to teach me how to last. Every trial is part of the journey, every scar becomes a guide. The mountain is not in my way, the mountain is the reason for the climb. I've known loss that left me broken, I've known fear that stole my breath, I've known nights so cold and endless I could barely take one step. Yet every wound became a teacher, every failure left a mark, and every valley that I walked through placed another star within the dark. The river doesn't fight the canyon, it learns to carve its way ahead. What seems a wall to those who fear it becomes a path for those who tread. The road was never meant to be easy, the storm was never meant to pass. The waves were not there to stop me, they were there to teach me how to last. Every trial is part of the journey, every scar becomes a guide. The mountain is not in my way, the mountain is the reason for the climb. For the climb. One day I stopped asking, why me? And started asking, what can I learn? The moment I embraced the fire lost its power to burn. For every challenge holds a gift, though hidden from the eye. The obstacle and destination were never separate all this time. The road was never meant to be easy, the storm was never meant to end. The battles were not set future